17-2-2. Seabrook's coming in 17-9. Sam Smith and Al Bernstein will be at Resorts International in Atlantic City beginning at 9 Eastern Time. That'll be this Thursday evening on ESPN. Well, with just several more selections to close out the second round of the draft, from time to time during this afternoon and through the morning, we've been stepping back, taking a historical look at what this draft means, what teams have been able to do. Steve Sable, why, you may ask, is he standing on a street corner in Philadelphia? A very good reason. It's a historical landmark in the NFL.
Institutions in this country have a way of growing from modest beginnings. The NFL draft is no exception. Now, you might be wondering what Robinson's luggage has to do with the draft. Well, this is the old site of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel.
Auburn, Thomas, defensive tackle, very good. Ben Thomas is still there. New England could use a nose guard, and I think he can play it. You know, at this point, I'm not looking at need, just names that are out there that can play. I mentioned Kelly before, top-rated guard, but I don't think he's Steinberg's type of guy. Could be, but I really like Ben Thomas. Paul?
No, the kicker.
You're going to get Butler in before.
I want to get Butler
they
in.
like Franklin last year. They traded for Franklin. He did all right with them.
Yeah, but I think that you got to get some young blood in there, and I think that Butler's the guy. I really don't know. New England, they're doing well, I guess, but
why don't you give them to Buffalo, which drafts first in the third round?
Could do that.
Hey, give them to Buffalo. Let New England keep Franklin. Give them Ben Thomas, and then give Buffalo the kicker. How's that?
You want Ben Thomas?
We just worked the trade, ladies and gentlemen.
You got him.
We are standing by for the New England Patriots' fourth selection of the draft, the final selection of the second round. We'll be back with that in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's go back out to the West Coast and Greg Wyatt and Howard Balzer. Gentlemen?
Giorgio, Chuck Knox called 1984 the challenge of '84 after Paul Johns and Kurt Warner went down. And I think they just got a little bit of insurance here in the second round with their first pick of the day.
Yeah, they finally got that first pick, and I think they made good use of it. Owen Gill's a very versatile back, good blocker, runs well, can catch the ball. And the thing about him is he's still developing as a player. He didn't start playing football until he was 16 years old. Grew up in London, where he played soccer and rugby, and then moved to, I believe, New York and Brooklyn when he was 16 years old. So he's still developing, and he should be a player that could really grow in the Seattle system.
Of course, in one of the other teams in the AFC West, and that would be Denver, as defensive end Simon Fletcher signed a situation pass rusher.
I think that's what they're looking for at him for. Needs a little more consistency before he develops into a full-time type player. But we see the situational defense so much a part of the NFL these days. Right here, the 49ers with 9 defensive linemen on the roster for the Super Bowl and used them all during the game. So the Broncos looking at that and seeing that you can bring these guys into certain situations where they can be effective. And I'm sure that's what they're looking at Fletcher for.
Would love to be in the war room at Jack Murphy Stadium right now, because Tom Bass has got to have the biggest grin in the world picking up Jeff Dale, a 4-year starter at LSU.
He's started right when he got into college, and he's a pretty good hitter. Probably has to improve a little as a cover man, but it's not as important to cover when you're playing safety as opposed to cornerback. He could turn out to be a pretty good strong safety for the Chargers. They need some depth, and they need some young blood, as Paul was talking about there with some other teams. That young blood is important to bring them in, and the Chargers will have 2 young defensive backs coming in to challenge for jobs with Jeffrey Dale and Wayne Davis from Indiana State.
The AFC West is definitely the best and most hotly contested conference in the National Football League, and it looks like nearly everybody has improved themselves so far in this draft. Now let's go back to Bobby in Bristol.
Thank you, Greggy. Simon Fletcher, defensive end out of Houston, was selected by Denver. That was the 54th pick. And Howard and Greg touched on it, a situational type of player who, Mel, as you pointed out, began as a defensive tackle and then didn't have too much success there, but is rangy enough that they were able to use him as a pass rusher on the outside defensive end.
He's strictly a potential pick, Bob, the way I see it. Needs some weight and he needs some strength. He benches 315, and some cornerbacks out there bench 330. Simon benches 315, so he has to spend an awful lot of time in the weight room. It's kind of a project. You have to spend about 2 to 3 years developing his skills, and maybe down the road he could develop into an outside pass rusher in the mold of, say, a Richard Dent with the Chicago Bears.
He's gotten better and better, as you said. You got to get him into the weight room. 6'6", 249, 250, and about 4'7", 4'8" speed. Simon Fletcher out of the University of Houston. Denver selection. And that goes into the Denver Hopper along with Steve Sewell and Vance Johnson. So 2 offensive picks, and they opt for the defensive line help, a futures pick, very possibly late in the second round, and plug him in defensively. Can he make an impact on that depth chart?
Either of us, I mean, Barney Chavis, I mean, he's been playing, I think, since the franchise started, and Bryson Manor is there, a 10-year man. Roland Jones is still certainly a ball player. There's no question about that, but they're looking for a little help. You can see they're getting a little old there, and everybody can use that designated pass rusher, who's the one theme that I think all the teams were looking for.
We saw Andre Townsend's name mentioned up there. He has even moved over to nose tackle, so you can see they really did need a pass rushing defensive end, although, you know, Fletcher is a 2 to 3 year project.
Well, certainly you'd have to think that the designated pass rusher may be in the 1980s to football what the short relief man came to baseball in the 1960s. You've got to just pick and choose so very well, and the Niners really showed us that as they won the Super Bowl back in '81, the way they were using some people on their front line. One more pick to close out the second round, and then the sprint to home starts with 5 minutes per pick with another hour of our live coverage from the Omni Park Central, from Sports Center, and from San Francisco. We'll continue in a moment.
American Express presents Do You Know Me? A look at the lives and careers of famous athletes. This week's American Express sports personality has 84 PGA Tour victories to his credit, including 3 Masters championships and a British Open title. In 1965, after 28 years on the tour, he became the oldest player to win a PGA event. We'll tell you who he is after this word from American Express.
Do you know me? It's frightening how many novels of suspense I've written. But still, when I'm not recognized, it just kills me. So instead of saying I wrote Carrie, I carry the American Express card. Without it, isn't life a little scary?
To apply for the card, look for
Back with our draft coverage, here's a look, in case you're just joining us, at our draft picks. Beginning with Buffalo and Bruce Smith, number 1, Bill Fralick, number 2. Houston picked Ray Childress, the defensive end of Texas A&M. Minnesota in the first round took Chris Dolman. Indianapolis, Dwayne Beckett, the linebacker of USC. Detroit took Lomas Brown. Green Bay, Ken Rutgers, the offensive lineman of USC. Ronnie Holmes, the defensive end from Washington, taken by Tampa Bay. Kevin Allen to Philadelphia. Al Toon to the New York Jets. Richard Johnson, the defensive back for Wisconsin. Jim Lachey, the tackle from Ohio State, taken by San Diego. Cincinnati took Eddie Brown, long time for him getting in. Buffalo took Derek Burrows, another cornerback. Kansas City, the first running back, and Ethan Horton. San Francisco taking another wide receiver, and Jerry Rice. Dallas took Kevin Brooks. St. Louis took Freddie Nunn, the linebacker of Mississippi. The Giants taking George Adams. Darrell Sims, the defensive end of Wisconsin, going to Pittsburgh. Los Angeles taking Jerry Gray of Texas. Chicago taking William Perry of Clemson. The biggest surprise of that first round, Jesse Hester, Alvin Tolles, Emmanuel King going to Cincinnati. Denver taking Steve Sewell, either running back or wide receiver, depending on how you project him. Miami taking Lorenzo Hampton. New England taking Trevor Mattich. Buffalo, Mark Trainowitz of Nebraska. Minnesota, Isaac Holt. Denver, Vance Johnson, the wide receiver out of Arizona. The Indianapolis Colts on the first round taking Donald Anderson of Purdue. Washington taking Torrey Nixon. Detroit, Kevin Glover. Cleveland, Greg Allen. Houston, Richard Byrd. Philadelphia, Randall Cunningham. In New Orleans, the Saints taking Darrell Gilbert, the offensive tackle out of Fullerton State. San Diego taking Wayne Davis, defensive back of Indiana State. The Jets in their second pick taking Lester Lyles, the defensive back of Virginia. Kansas City taking Jonathan Hayes. Buffalo, Chris Burkett. Cincinnati, Carl Zander. Jesse Penn going to the Dallas Cowboys, a linebacker. Mike Gann of Atlanta to Atlanta of Notre Dame. The Giants taking Stacy Robinson out of North Dakota State. Mark Benning, Garen Veris, Reggie Phillips going to Chicago. The Los Angeles Rams picking Chuck Scott. St. Louis taking Scott Burgold, the defensive end of Wisconsin. New England taking Jim Bowman, the defensive back of Central Michigan. Seattle, Owen Gill, the running back of Iowa. Simon Fletcher going to Denver. Jeff Dale, the safety of LSU to San Diego. And New England has taken Ben Thomas, the defensive end of Auburn. And Zim, you got that one on the nose.
One of the few.
One of the few. So we add it all up after 2 rounds of competition. Round number 1 taking 3 hours and 36 minutes. Round number 2 just about 3.5 hours as well. And the first selection of the third round is in now. Buffalo has gotten the quarterback that we were discussing earlier, and Frank Wright, the quarterback out of the University of Maryland. Jim?
Very good full ball, helped his chances immeasurably. Moved the team. One of these guys that doesn't seem to have great computer skills, not a sensational arm, but he seems to have a touch on the field. They respond well to him, and, you know, from the Bills, I'm going to take a shot at a quarterback, too.
Paul?
Well, obviously that, not obviously, but they're talking about Vince Ferragamo from L.A. going to Buffalo in a trade sometime, whether it's going to be during this draft or not. Joe Dufek is the quarterback that they plan to go with next year. Joe Ferguson, after 13 years, I guess, is. I don't think that Joe Ferguson is the kind of guy that's going to sit on the bench in Buffalo, especially if you're making up close to $600,000 a year. So I think it's an excellent move for Buffalo, because in the first 4 picks that they had in the first 2 rounds, as we said before, George, they got everybody that they wanted, and I think they're very happy with it.
You know, one thing about Buffalo quarterbacks, though, when they draft a quarterback, they better get a guy with a cannon for an arm, because once that weather turns in November, I mean, I saw a game there Joe Namath played where the wind just took that ball of his and turned it upside down and pushed it back. I mean, really, nobody has any good stats when it gets cold, and that because Paul knows so well. They better get a guy who can throw it through the wind there.
Yeah, throw through a brick building is what you got to get
That's right.
We're waiting on the Giant selection. Let's go to the podium now for the New York Giants selection. And again, remember, it's 5 minutes per pick in the 3rd round.
Could be Kelly of Notre
Choice
Dame.
from Houston. Select Tyrone Davis, defensive back, Clemson. Tyrone Davis, defensive back, Clemson, selected by the Giants. Minnesota has the next 2 selections.
Minnesota with their own selection, and then a selection in the deal with Atlanta coming up next. So Tyrone Davis, a defensive back out of Clemson, joining his teammate William Perry, selected from Clemson earlier. Now, when we add it all up, let's see how it shapes up through 2 rounds in regard to the individual positions. Offensive linemen, 10 total offensive linemen selected so far after 2 rounds of competition. This compares to 1984 favorably. There were 7 offensive linemen taken in '84 in the first 2 rounds. 11 defensive backs taken during the course of the first 2 rounds. There were 9 defensive backs taken a year ago. Defensive linemen, 12 taken through the first 2 rounds. A year ago, there were a total of 13 defensive linemen selected. So you can see it's going pretty much the same as we've discussed it. Those through the first 2 rounds were on 5 minutes a selection. Coming up, we're waiting on Minnesota's first of 2 in a row. We'll be back after this.
NFL again, but if there have been several topics of conversation in the first round, yes, the surprise from Chicago's selection of William Perry at Clemson, and also San Francisco trading up, seeing that the wide receivers would last a little bit longer on the draft board than we first thought going into this draft, and so San Francisco, the epitome of execution, coming away with what could be one of the fastest guys in this draft, Jerry Rice, the wide receiver at Mississippi Valley State. Chris?
All right, Bob, and Jerry Rice is on the phone with us now down in Mississippi, and Jerry, congratulations. What are your thoughts on being selected by the Super Bowl champion? Certainly you thought you would go in the first half of the draft, as you just about did. Do you have any thought at all of playing with a team that won it all last year?
Well, not at all. I'm glad to be a part of the San Francisco 49ers. They've always been a dream team, and I'm happy they consider me as their pick.
Did you ever question the fact, you know, you went to Mississippi Valley State, you rung up all those marvelous stats, over 100 catches last couple of years, but were you worried until late this year when it was obvious you were going to be an early pick that, gee, maybe I really hurt myself by going to a smaller school, or are you happy with the way everything's turned out?
Yes, I'm happy. If I hadn't went to Mississippi Valley, I probably wouldn't have gotten this opportunity. And I owe them everything, and I'm looking forward to being a part of the NFL, because I feel that San Francisco, they have the same system that Mississippi Valley State ran. So it's not going to be that hard for me to adjust to it.
Well, you certainly are going to a team that likes to throw the ball and certainly likes you. Let me ask you, what you did, I guess you were 170 pounds coming out of high school, and this is why many of the other let's say, bigger name schools shied away from you to recruit you, and I know you really improved your speed a lot. How did you do all this?
I would say through weights and a lot of hard work. I knew I had to improve to become a #1 draft choice. So I put my mind all into it, and everything seemed to be working out okay for me.
It certainly does. Congratulations, Jerry, on your trip from Division I AA to the San Francisco 49ers, the defending Super Bowl champions, and best of luck in the National Football League.
Thank you.
Okay, that's Jerry Rice, who, as you mentioned, Bob, the Niners made all those moves with New England, like they did 3 years ago to get Russ Francis. It's interesting, you can't teach speed, they say, but he taught it to himself and improved himself, and now he's a first-rounder.
And the number 16 selection overall. Let's just close out, if we can, for those of you wanting to get a good look at what your team selected and whom your team selected in the first couple of rounds. Close out the second round and go back and take a closer look at, for example, San Diego's selection. Jeffrey Dale out of LSU, safety back, who has really spent a lot of time in the weight room and getting better and better with his strength. A good hitter and then really has a good attitude. Moved to safety as a freshman, entered school as a running back. He was the selection of San Diego. And then the final selection of the second round was New England's choice of defensive tackle Ben Thomas at Auburn, who really as a junior had to share some of the headlines, but had things pretty much to himself in the limelight as a senior at Auburn.
You sure did. When you look at New England here, they had three second-round selections, so they were in a position to really come through with some quality players. Ben Thomas will give them that possible nose tackles they're looking for. You know, Lester Williams was a first-round selection a few years back. Has really been a bust for the New England Patriots. They're hoping he comes through, but they wanted that insurance policy. I think Thomas gives them that. They're hoping that Kenneth Sims develops into a player they thought he would be. So they have some question marks on that defensive front. Ben Thomas just adds one more fairly talented young player to that arsenal, and they hope that some of these players come through and give them that pass rush they really haven't had in the last few years.
You know, you brought up a good point. Now, Kenneth Sims, the #1 pick overall just a couple of years ago, and Lester Williams really hadn't panned out. Sims, I know he's been hurt some, but you know, for #1 overall pick, he has not been the type of player that Dick Steinberg had in mind. Now, today in the second round, they go twice for defensive lineman. Thomas right there and Garen Veris, defensive end from Stanford. You kind of wonder, New England really didn't feel, I'm sure 2 years ago, that they would have to be drafting this high a couple of defensive linemen.
I didn't think so, you know, then when you look back, they thought Sims was going to be an all-pro, which he hasn't lived up to. Lester Williams obviously he was beaten out by Dennis Owens, a free agent nose tackle out of North Carolina State. So you look at this draft, Garen Veris is a defensive end. They hope to give him that outside pass rush. Ben Thomas maybe the nose tackle. So they're looking for a complete overhaul with maybe Kenneth Sims holding on to his starting job and Veris to push the one-end spot, Toby Williams, and Ben Thomas to push Lester Williams. And what happens when you get competition, as you know, Chris, everybody reaches a new level. And I think it may push Sims and it may push Lester Williams to the point now where they finally reach that potential that Dick Steinberg had when he drafted them.
Well, of course, this is the first draft for Raymond Berry and the Patriots, a team that weren't far off, Bobby, from making the playoffs last year. But Sims does need to be pushed, and maybe these are the guys to do it.
Top pick of the third round was Frank Reich, a quarterback out of Maryland, selected by Buffalo. And then the second selection in the third round today, where again we're operating under 5 minutes per selection. The Giants in the trade selection they had for the trade with Butch Walpole's draft selection, going for defensive back Tyrone Davis out of Clemson, who was a fifth-year senior, sat out this redshirt season back in '81 and had two outstanding seasons patrolling the corner for Danny Ford. And really, I think maybe a little bit of work. I know you were telling me, Mel, on technique.
Yeah, I did. I thought he would go possibly to the Giants in the second round. He went to the Giants at the top of the third. Of course, you look at a guy like Davis in coverage. He does better in man-to-man, where he can just go out there and cover his guy. When he gets in the zone, he looks lost and doesn't have that ball awareness in the zone defense. So I think he needs some work. He has some ability. I thought he was slightly overrated because at one time I thought he'd go in the first round, Bob. He lasted until the third round. A decent choice for the Giants. There's questions about Mark Haynes. Will he be back next year? We'll have to wait and see on that, but that's one of the reasons I think the Giants went after defensive back, and also Courier. They're not really satisfied with him at safety. So with the Haynes and the Courier question marks, that's why they went for the defensive back early on in the third round.
Well, Minnesota have the second two selections of the third round. We'll be recapping all your picks as they come fast and furious now, as each team with that 5-minute limit on the selections in the third round. Minnesota twice, then Indianapolis, then Detroit. We'll continue with early third round coverage right after this commercial word.
Welcome back to the Omni Park Central Hotel in New York City. We are waiting on Buffalo's selection here in the 7th round, already completed as of this hour in the second round of competition. Frank Reich, the quarterback out of the University of Maryland, has been selected by Buffalo. The New York Giants have taken Tyrone Davis, defensive back from Clemson. Minnesota took Kirk Laudermilk, a center from Ohio State, 6'3", 264 pounds. In addition to that, it was Minnesota picking again right after that. They took Tim Meamber, a 6'2", 224-pound linebacker out of Washington. Indianapolis has just selected Anthony Young, a defensive back for the Temple Owls. And Detroit has taken James Johnson, a linebacker out of San Diego State. We are waiting for Buffalo on its selection. Then will come Tampa Bay, Miami, Minnesota again, the Jets, New Orleans, and San Diego as we continue to go through round 3 of this National Football League collegiate player draft. Let's go back down to Sam Rosen on the floor of the draft.
Thank you, George, and with me is Joel Bushbaum of Pro Football Weekly. And as we look at the first round, the first couple of rounds of the NFL draft, Joel, obviously Buffalo has had a pretty good draft.
Right. They really helped themselves. Obviously, Bruce Smith picked before the draft. Derek Burrows, they traded down, get the extra pick, get the guy they would have taken anyhow, the cover corner they needed. Then top of the 3rd round, they got Frank Reich, who is a pretty good quarterback. I really think he's underrated, and he could develop into a fine quarterback in a couple of years. He's the guy who was behind Esiason up until his senior year, looked terrible the first 2 games, really came on, got hurt, came back from the injury, led him to the dramatic come-from-behind win over Miami, and looked very good in the Hula Bowl.
What other teams have really helped themselves in the draft?
Houston Oilers, definitely. Ray Childress could be better than Bruce Smith. Richard Johnson's the top defensive back in this draft. Richard Byrd of Southern Miss is the nose tackle that can rush the passer they needed. So I really think the Oilers helped themselves. A couple other clubs with multiple picks helped themselves with a lot of good players. Cincinnati, Eddie Brown is an impact guy. He'll definitely help them. Emmanuel King should help them. I'm not that high on Carl Sanders, but he will help them. New England got 4 good football players at positions of need. Trevor Maddich, they needed a center to step in. Pete Brock's knee, he may be finished. Garen Barris, a Stanford, the defensive end on the 2nd round, late in the 2nd round, in my opinion, was a steal. And Jim Bowman, the safety's a pretty good football player, big and fast, needs development on coverage. Ben Thomas of Auburn is going to press Lester Williams on the nose. I think the clubs basically, with the multiple picks, help themselves because this is a draft with a lot of equals. You have a lot of good football players, but you don't have the great impact football player, the Eric Dickersons, the John Elways, the Chris Hinton types.
You think a lot of teams will be moving up because of that?
Well, I think the clubs with the multiple picks, if they use them wisely, will be moving up, and it can really alter the balance of power in a division. Like in the AFC East, if Buffalo maybe gets a Jim Kelly back all of a sudden with all the people they've added in the past couple of weeks, they could jump right back into it. On the other hand, they definitely should move ahead of a club like Indianapolis, which didn't have that many picks.
Joel, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
Joel Bushbaum of Pro Football Weekly, his assessment of today's NFL draft. Let's go back to George Grand.
Thank you very much, Sam. Joel, just like Mel Kiper, lives and breathes every step of the way during the course of the National Football League season to keep up on this. It's not just a 1 week or a 1 day effort for them. It is from January to December each and every year. They take every moment of every day to spend a lot of time. And really, just as in the case of Mel, they really do it. It's a labor of love, not just a labor for financial reasons. Okay, we are now reviewing the picks of the Minnesota Vikings. We've got the Buffalo pick. Let's go to Joe Ryan.
Linebacker, Utah State. Hal Garner, linebacker, Utah State, selected by Buffalo. Tampa Bay is up to be followed by Miami.
Al Goyner, the linebacker out of Utah State, the 7th selection. Tampa Bay is up next. Let's take a look at Minnesota's first pick. Kirk Laudermilk, 6'3", 264 pounds worth of athlete, a center from Ohio State. He has played defensive tackle, offensive guard, and then finally moving over to the center position. In terms of this past year, of course, he was on the injured list. He did suffer a broken ankle, came back, though, in postseason competition. And the biggest question is going to be, did he come back 100%, gentlemen?
Well, you know, George, when you take a look at Laudermilk, again, I'll go back to, they've given him the physical. They know how well he is. But when you see a center drive out like Laudermilk does and and have to slide through, then get a linebacker and move his body and use his body and keeps moving all the time. These are the things that they look at in all football players, number one. But when you see a center that keeps moving, just doesn't go to the ground and say, okay, maybe in that situation, we don't know whether he missed a man or not, but he went through to get somebody else. That's hustle.
I think the centers are falling as predicted. Trainowitz, Glover, Maddox in a bunch, and Laudermick is the fourth. I mean, they figure that he's a good, steady player who's going to help somebody play, might not start right away, and that's about where he felt.
Okay, just while we were discussing that, Irvin Randall, linebacker out of Baylor, was selected by Tampa Bay. Irvin Randall, linebacker out of Baylor, playing for the Bears, selected by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. ESPN's live and continuous coverage of the 1985 National Football League Draft will continue after this timeout.
Lawringers has serviced cars in this area for 15 years. At Lawringers Getty on Salem Road, we specialize in radiator repair.
Bob Lawringer here from Lawringers. Our detailed work can preserve your radiator for many, many years, and our prices are cheap. Stop in and see for yourself.
Our new computerized emission equipment is now a standard that all re-inspection stations must follow.
This computer analyzer can tell you a number of things about your car that you don't already know. You can find this computer at two of our locations, on Salem Road and Beverly Run Cocos Road, and on Van Skyver Parkway and Northampton Drive in Willingboro. And don't forget, any other type of service repair, from rebuilding your motor to a minor tune-up, can be done at our Sunoco station, located in Edgewater Park behind Rickles.
That's right, it's springtime and Lawringers can get your lawnmower ready for the season. Stop by for all your automotive needs at Lawringers.
Miami is up with the 9th selection in the 3rd round. That's a selection they acquired in the trade for center Mark Denard from Philadelphia. That was back in March of 1984. But let's jump back now to the first selection of the 3rd round. The second quarterback that went in this draft. I think erroneously about an hour ago I mentioned there might have been a run on quarterbacks. There was just one quarterback at that point, Randall Cunningham, taken by Philadelphia. Frank Reich, first selection of the 3rd round. Now, you're down Maryland Way in Balmer. Let's let you tell us all about Frank Reich.
Well, he waited in the wings. Boomer Esiason was his roommate, and they're two different styles. Boomer was a real confident type leader. Frank's a little bit more reserved. Doesn't have that take control attitude that Boomer had. He's got a good arm, but he tends to be erratic at times. Can roll, but he's not real mobile. Really can whip the ball. When he's hot, and when he's erratic, he tends to miss open receivers. Had some great games late in the year. You know, he slightly separated his shoulder against Wake Forest, missed some time. Stan Gelbaugh, a junior, took over. Then he came back late, and when they were down 31-0 against Miami of Florida, brought him back, and probably one of the most dramatic comebacks of all time in college football. Played well the rest of the year against Virginia and Clemson, and took them back from behind against Tennessee in the bowl game, Bob.
Let me ask you, because you've had good success certainly predicting a number of things, uncannily accurate success with Buffalo, and since you're tied in well, I think, around the AFC East, how much longer and how much are they prepared to wait for Jim Kelly? And, I mean, Reich's not a Kelly, certainly, but Kelly, they have the rights for 3 more seasons, but, you know, we haven't seen anyone make a move today towards a USFL player. No supplemental draft rights have been traded. No USFL players have been drafted.
I think they're going to look at Jim Kelly. You know, that's who they're counting on, really. That's the guy that they want to be their franchise quarterback, and they know they may have to wait. The Houston Gamblers are obviously going to be around at least next year, so that's the guy they want. Obviously, you know, they have Joe Dufek. They think he has potential, but they really don't think he's going to be a starter in the future. Matt Kofler, a second-round pick, has been a bust for him. They're obviously trying to possibly make a trade for Vince Ferragamo. That never came about. Then you look at the other possibility, trading with Joe Ferguson. We'll see if that may happen. I think Frank Reich, 2 or 3 years down the road, has a chance to be a starter for the Buffalo Bills. It's going to take some time, but I think, you know, down the road he could. If they get Jim Kelly back, they're in a good position. They have 2 fine young quarterbacks.
Right.
And they can't keep waiting. They have to make a decision. They made a decision to go with Frank Reich.
Think of the guys that they haven't had a shot at a quarterback, though. I mean, if you look at it, that they could have had Kozar either one way or the other if they had done it this year. They could have had Jim Kelly. Well, they did draft him, but, of course, they didn't come up. And they could have had Flutie, I guess, if they wanted this year. Now they end up with Joe Dufek. And they have Matt Kofler, a guy who I thought they had high promise on a second rounder a couple of years ago, but no. And now Frank Reich to go along with the veteran Ferguson. What could have been and what is are 2 different things.
Exactly.
And what might be with Frank Reich? Well, if they keep waiting for Kelly, and maybe he won't show, we've had only one trade today involving an NFL veteran, that being Joe Washington being sent to Atlanta. At one of the combines, we talked to Frank Reich about thinking that some people say quarterbacks really have to change their personality to be take-charge people on the field.
Well, I don't think there's a whole lot of change in personality. I try to be the same person. I think if you try to get out of character and try to change the way you are, it'll lessen your performance. So when I get out on the field, I try to basically stay the same. You know, I try to keep calm and keep a little low-key, and at the same time just try to lead by example and to display out there to the other players that I know the offense and I know what I'm doing and I can throw the ball.
If that young man does nothing else in football as a professional, he will have one of the greatest memories ever, certainly in the history of college football, that great comeback that Maryland had in the Orange Bowl against the University of Miami this year. Let's get back to New York as we're getting towards the halfway point now of round number 3.
Thanks, Bob. Let's go to the podium where the Jets pick is up next to Joe Ryan.
New York Jets select Donnie Elder, defensive back, Memphis State. Donnie Elder, defensive back, Memphis State. New Orleans is up to be followed by San Diego.
The irony of the draft for the first time on this day, it doesn't happen that often, 2 Memphis State players selected back-to-back. Tim Long, the tackle out of Memphis State, was selected by Minnesota just prior to this. Then Donnie Elder, the defensive back of Memphis State, selected right after him. Just prior to that, Miami took George Little, a defensive tackle from Iowa. And let's follow the discussion of Jim Kelly. First of all, there has been talk, when are they going to make the move on Kelly? But let's talk in the broad perspective of the run-and-shoot offense. It's very popular in the United States Football League. Why isn't it being adapted in the 1980s in the National Football League to this point in time?
Well, I think most of your traditional teams feel that you need a running attack as well, especially cold weather teams. Run and shoot is fine for hot weather teams. What do you do if you're playing run and shoot in Buffalo? And you have the whole December to play at home, you know, part of November. I mean, to me, I've seen it quite a bit, and to me it looks like a lot of picks, a lot of underneath passing. The only running is drop plays. It looks unbalanced, and it looks like it works in something like the USFL where the offense is way ahead of the defense. With more sophisticated defense and better defensive players, I don't think it would be so good.
You covered the USFL, Paul. Do you think it would work in the National Football League?
I certainly do. I'm sorry, I have to disagree with Paul because, well, you know I was going to disagree with you.
Of course.
That's because why we're both here. Right. The reason I say that, it depends on the quarterback that you have. And first of all, you got to understand about run and shoot. There are no tight ends in run and shoot. There are 2 wideouts, 2 slot backs, the fullback that's extremely strong, and what they do is they flood areas all the time. And you really don't have to have a strong arm. Now, if you take a look at a guy like St. Louis, they have Neil Lomax. He would be excellent in the run and shoot. Marino would not. Ferguson might be a little short for it, but I mean, you got to be a little bit taller. I know you're going to disagree.
You have to have the receivers, too.
You have to have receivers. But the receivers don't have to be tall. They have to be guys. If you take a look at Houston and Denver in the USFL, George, they're all 5'9", 5'10", and below. You rarely see a 6-foot wide receiver in that system. And I just think by the run and shoot, it gives you so many options. The NFL won't do it because the USFL uses it.
It's been done. The Rams had a run and shoot in the 1950s. In 1950 and 51, where they'd play 4 little backs, receivers. They'd have a receiver out of the backfield, Vitamin Smith, Tommy Kalmine, those little guys. They did it, and they lit up the board, set all sorts of records, and then people defensed it. And Pop Ivy did that in the old AFL. We came down from Canada with all this run and shoot stuff.
And you watched it when you were a teenager in the 1800s.
I think it proves one thing, and that's certainly that there really is nothing new in anything, whether it's the NBA or the NHL or professional football. It's something that probably it has been worked before in professional football in the National Football League, but certainly it is being popularized now by Mouse Davis and the rest of the people in the USFL. Let's get this one. John Hendy.
John Hendy,
the defensive back for Long Beach State.
Cal State, Long Beach.
While we were discussing the USFL philosophy of run and shoot, Jack Del Rio, the linebacker of the University of Southern California, was selected by the New Orleans Saints. So Del Rio becomes the second
For the sixth consecutive year, the National Football League draft in this third round, which is where we are right now. New Orleans picking 12th in the third round. Selected Jack Del Rio, a linebacker out of USC. Last night on our preview show, we spoke about Dwayne Bickett and Jack Del Rio, both USC linebackers. Bickett, his stock having come up this year after having been down for a couple of years. And Del Rio, maybe a bit of a nosedive this year. Both, though, out of USC.
Well, I think at USC you find a top level of competition, and that was one of the reasons why I chose to attend USC, is I felt that I could go in and find out where I stood right away, you know, play against the best and play with the best, and really get a good idea of how good you were. And I feel that now that I've performed well at that level, I'm just really looking forward to going on to the next level.
We have an excellent program, and it's similar to the pros. We have big people, big linemen, you know, so we're fairly used to playing the size people in the NFL. Obviously, we don't have the talent that they have, you know, at every single position, but I think, you know, the type of football we play, that grind them up and you know, the physical game that USC plays, I think that really prepares us for the type of game that you can expect in the NFL.
And so Bickett and Del Rio, friends and teammates, both coming out of USC. Del Rio going in the third round. In the first round selection, Bickett was selected in this draft. So he went to the Indianapolis Colts. Also selected was Don Anderson by the Colts, a cornerback out of Purdue, and they followed that selection up in the third round with Anthony Young, the defensive back out of Temple, and some of the selectees of the Colts standing by on the phone, Chris.
Okay, Bob, we have Don Anderson with us right now, as you mentioned, going to the Indianapolis Colts. Don, congratulations. You certainly don't have to travel very far from college to your NFL team, do you?
No, just right down the road. I'm playing for Indianapolis. That is a plus. You know, being right from Purdue University, I've got acquainted with a lot of friends that way I can still go back and see them.
Well, what have the Colts said to you today? I mean, they say, you know that if you follow the Colts, you can't help but do that playing at Purdue, that they can use help all the way across the ball. Do you like getting in on the ground floor? New coach, team has nowhere to go but up?
Oh, yeah, that's always a good situation, you know, because don't nobody know anybody, you know, but new coach coming in and everybody gets a fair chance. I knew that possibly that maybe Indianapolis might have been, you know, going to pick me up, because the last week they have been really strong as far as coming down. I went down there and took one of their individual physicals, and they said, there's a strong possibility that they might pick me up.
Oh, I know they are very impressed with your speed in the defensive backfield, one of the fastest guys around. Good luck in the National Football League.
Thank you very much.
Also today in the draft, the San Diego Chargers have made a little bit of news. We talked about Tom Bass and the proclivity for the Chargers to draft defense. Now, Wayne Davis is one of 3 defensive backs that so far the Chargers have taken. So, Chris, we're about to speak with Wayne. Is going to be, if they make these rookies all room together at minicamp, the rookie DBs are going to be out of hammocks, because they've got a lot of them coming in.
Well, they also, on the phone now with us, Wayne Davis from Indiana State, who was second-round pick of the San Diego Chargers. They say, Wayne, the Chargers once again looking for defense. They obviously looked your way. Your thoughts on being drafted by a team in a pretty nice place to live?
Oh, you better believe I'm a very happy man right now, because I was really looking forward to playing with the San Diego Chargers, because they have shown a lot of interest in me during the season, especially when the coach came out to work me out. And when the pick was coming up in the second round, I kind of had my fingers crossed, saying, I hope they get me. And they did.
All right, well, Wayne, I'm glad things have worked out for you. Enjoy yourself out on the West Coast, and best of luck. Memorize that school fight song. You'll have to sing it in a few months.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Wayne, that's the second-round draft pick of the Chargers, Wayne Davis, cornerback from Indiana State. The Chargers, 3 out of their 4 picks are DBs.
They started with Jim Boucher, the guard at Ohio State. We're going to check in one more time with San Francisco. And Greg Wyatt standing by with Howard Balzer. The AFC has been making some news. San Francisco trading up a little bit today. The Chargers with their 3 DBs. Seattle finally making a pick. Greg's got his eye on the West Coast. Greg?
Bobby, of course we are in San Francisco, and you have to think about the 49ers. And it was last Friday when Bill Walsh said, I really wonder if anybody will trade with us, if we can somehow squeak up there and get a wide receiver, and they did just that.
They did that, and what they had to give up was a second-round pick, basically, and some drafting position that really they benefited by with switches on the first and the third round. So it was a good deal. And like Chris pointed out earlier, the 49ers seem to do these things after they win the Super Bowl. They don't need a whole lot, obviously, so they're looking for ways to improve.
Other first-rounders, tremendous success, it would seem, at least, from the Western teams in both the NFC and the AFC.
One team we haven't talked about too much is New Orleans, and of course they made the Rodgers deal, which really wasn't a great deal, I don't think, but at least they got a first-round pick out of it, and were able to land Alvin Tolles of Tennessee. They came back with Darren Gilbert, the tackle, on the second round, and then they added Jack Del Rio. And there's a classic case of the player who may be probably one of the highest-rated players before the college season, and he and Vickett go in opposite directions. But I think Del Rio is still going to be a good pro football player. New Orleans with Bunk Phillips might just be the place for him.
You think about round 2 and Seattle with its first pick, and that was in the second round, picking up Owen Gill. Good backup for Kurt Warner.
Excellent backup behind Kurt Warner. Obviously, everyone hopes that Kurt can come back from that injury, but it's always good. It's always important to have that depth. You never know. It's a long season, 16 games in the NFL, plus the summer and the exhibition, and it's important to have that good backup. And Gill gives them a lot of versatility out of the backfield, and that was a good pick for them. The only pick they have in the first 3 rounds, unless New England gives them that third-round pick back, as we talked about earlier.
Of course, Ron Ney coordinating the draft for the San Diego Chargers. It looks pretty good, at least right now, if they can sign him.
Well, not only if they can sign him, but again, how they make that transition to the pro game. They've added 3 defensive backs, the latest one, Hendy from Long Beach State. So they realize they need help in the secondary, and I guess they figure if they can get 2 out of these 3 guys in the lineup, they'll have made a plus out of it.
Howard, it's been nice working with you here in San Francisco, and we'd like to thank owner Eddie DeBartolo of the San Francisco 49ers, John McVay, the general manager, and, of course, Bill Walsh. Now back to Bobby in Bristol.
Thank you, Greg. Nice job. Today we'll be swinging about, getting our final thoughts on this draft day 1985 right after this.
Welcome back to the Omni Park Central Hotel in New York City as we wind up our full day of coverage of the 1985 NFL Draft. And final impressions have to be that there were no real superstars in this draft, no franchise players, but a lot of solid players who could help turn a lot of losing teams into winning teams and contenders. And, of course, that remains to be seen when we play out the 1985 season. Now back to George Grand.
Thank you very much, Sam. And for those of us here at the Omni Park Central in New York City, it has been a day where there have been some surprises, Paul McGuire.
Well, Buffalo did not lie to me, George. They were so happy, and I'm from Buffalo, and I'll tell you, I'm so happy with their draft. But yeah, there are some surprises in there. I think Sam hit it on the head. There really are not a whole lot of blue chippers in this draft, but a lot of excellent football players. And I think this draft shows you that most of these players are on a par with each other, especially in the first 2 rounds.
Biggest surprise, Jim, of this day?
Well, the most dramatic thing on the board, the biggest surprise was either Perry or the wide receivers, as we said before, but Buffalo with a real smorgasbord of a draft. I mean, they got everything. If the guys only play well, perform well, it'd be great. Right now, they're looking terrific on paper, but we still have to see.
And, of course, remember that this is just the first step. Now the next key is you have to sign these athletes, and we've just started on what will be an 18-hour day of drafting activity by the time it is all over. We will stay here to keep updating you on what's happening during the course of the rest of the afternoon. If there are any late developments of import, we'll be passing them on to you on the ESPN Sports Center. Now let's go back to the Sports Center and Bob Lee.
Thank you, George. Nice job. Let's get some quick thoughts here. Big stories, final impressions. Chris?
Well, I was a little disappointed as far as our drama goes. I thought we had decided that a lot of players would be traded. That's the way I had figured it, but we tried to get the drama for everybody. Sorry, we only got Joe Washington traded. We're not sure that was a big dramatic trade. The other ones will have to wait. I think the developments of the wide receivers, Toon going to the Jets, Eddie Brown going to Cincinnati, Jerry Rice to San Francisco. Years from now, we won't remember that they didn't go as early as they were supposed to go, and these 3 all could be excellent franchise players. I look forward to them in the NFL. Mel, the draft was, though, like we thought it would be.
I think it did. There's only been really 3 surprises, one in each round. The first round, of course, William Perry was a bit of a surprise. We go to the second round, Reggie Phillips, also to Chicago. Then the third round, James Johnson, a linebacker from San Diego State, about 6 rounds, a little too high as far as I was concerned, to Detroit. So 1 reach around is not that much. That tells you right there it's an outstanding middle round draft with a lot of talent. They're still looking at this board. There's a lot of talent still there. and teams can really clean up in the middle rounds, especially those teams with extra choices in, say, the 6th, 7th, and 8th rounds.
And folks, once again, he was right on with this blue book here, the 1985 draft report. Get your 86 orders in now.
George Grant touched on it, trying to sign these players. The players this year, because both there are not a great deal of star players in this draft, and because the economics of the situation, the contracts may be smaller than what the first-round picks got last year. The USFL, through the premium rounds, we haven't heard a name mentioned yet. But I tell you, when you can take somebody off the streets of New York as a fan, and he can tell you that North Dakota State runs the Veer offense, you know there's widespread interest in pro football for everybody in San Francisco, in New York, and here in the Sports Center. I'm Bob Lee. Thanks for joining us.